Okay, interesting.
Call to order the June 19th, 2019 Board of Commissioner meetings. Please silence your cell phones, pagers, and other electronic communication devices. Agendas are located at the back of the chambers. First, we'll have a moment of silent reflection, and then Pledge of Allegiance led by Commissioner Drews, please.
Thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
Morning, Lloyd. Morning, Mark. Good morning.
First, we'll have a review and approval of the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Next, we'll have the Pennington County budget hearings. First, the provisional budget update by Cindy Moeller.
Good morning, Commissioners. Cindy Moeller, Pennington County Auditor. Not even sure where to begin, but I think the best place for us to start is with the means of finance. That's where all the numbers come together and where we're actually going to see the big picture of where we're sitting. I prepared this based on the budgets that were turned in from the different departments using our current wage policy and any modest increases, hopefully, in operations. If you look at, well, I might want to talk about the new tax dollars that we could go into our max tax this year. For the county consolidated levy, which covers your general fund, accumulated building fund, and the county fair fund, we have, with the state certified CPI and growth, we have 2.176. And then if you add in the stored CPI that we could potentially use, that would be $3,117,715. And I know you guys have that in your packet, right? You did get that to them. For county fire, the state certified CPI and growth come to $8,747. They have no stored CPI in county fire. Library new taxes that we could have for state CPI and current year growth is $12,098. Unorganized road, again, no stored CPI. And so our new tax dollars could be $68,493. So that's what we have to support our budget with, along with any of the miscellaneous revenues and any increases in those that the different departments may have. So looking at our means of finance, the big number that I think we all look at when we're looking at this is what our potential reserves are going to be. And I did prepare, and Holly gave you a worksheet on the reserve history from prior years and what I'm looking at projecting for the end of 2019. And then based on that, looking forward into 2020, we're looking at a reserve ending balance of about 13.12%. In order to reach the 19% goal that was set by motion last year, or was it 2 years ago? In 18, okay. We're short about $4.4 million to reach that goal. I think the board needs to look at that goal and see if that's a realistic goal, if they want to set a new goal for this year. In looking at some information from the Department of Legislative Audit, I think a goal of 15%, to increase it to 15%, if we could possibly do that this year, that would be good for a starting point to increase that. It's all going to be up to the board to, in the end, decide where we want to go with that goal. So looking at the means of finance, we've got the 2020 budget, and then we have the state, or the factored increase of 5% that the state mandates, the miscellaneous revenues, cash reserves. What this I believe would make more sense if this says cash applied, because that is the amount of cash that you would need from reserves to meet the budget plus the 5%. So you take those two numbers, add in or subtract out the miscellaneous revenue, subtract out the tax dollars, and this is what you would end up taking from reserves. I don't believe that we've ever taken that 5%, because that's over and above what the actual budget is set at. So you could reduce this by the $3 million. And that is actually calculated into this 13%. So I'm not taking 8 million to get to 13. I'm only using the difference there. County fire, you can see there's just a little bit that would need to come from the cash applied, and also from unorganized road, there would be just a little bit of cash applied. All of the unorganized road money eventually ends up in road and bridge, and that's why you're seeing a 0% reserve over here. On library, you can see we wouldn't need to use any to meet this goal, and we would not need to use the full amount of the opt-out. We could potentially reduce the amount that we take from the opt-out, because we do have a 40% reserve sitting in the library fund right now. That's another decision that the board would need to make, is what kind of a goal you would like to see for library reserves. And of course, then when we get down into the non-levied funds, it's pretty simple. Cash in, cash out. And then there are some that will be using cash reserves. So that is where we sit for the 2020 budget. I don't know, does anybody have any questions so far?
Any questions?
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Drews?
Cindy, the 19% goal, do you know, did the commission establish that as a policy, or was that a motion?
That was a motion.
Okay, so is there any policy relative to?
We do not have an actual written policy relative to reserve.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Gary, we did talk about if Cindy could look into bringing a policy forward. That way we had something every year to look at, and why the goal is a certain amount for the county on reserves, and just how we do things for some of this budget. So we're having Cindy look at a couple of things on the backside that we had questions on, like steps and some other stuff, but they are looking into that, Cindy, Holly, and John, just to see how we do the steps and who gets the steps, that kind of stuff. Because a lot of times, as the chair, you get to see who's getting moved up, because we sign the papers, but the rest of the commission does not. Plus, it's a nice way to kind of see how each department's doing and how they're doing their steps. So just something that's coming forward for the board to look at. And then, like I said, Cindy also believed, if I'm correct, Miss Cindy, that if we look at what's supposed to be the goal and what percentage of your budget should be as reserves. Now, this board can do whatever they want, this commission can, but I think the auditor, and this is my opinion, she knows best of what that reserve needs to be at in order to meet our goal every year. So if she can set some type of policy that sets that forward and realistically bring it forward, it makes a huge difference on our budgets. So, any questions for Miss Cindy? Everybody understands what we have in reserves at this time, and the difference on this budget is $4,474,931 this year. Okay, thank you, Miss Cindy. And then if we could go through the county consolidated general cumulative building and fair funds. We do have an extra sheet if you look on your, does everybody have that? Hollywood, did we hand that out?
Yeah, it's in the front of the budget books.
Okay, and
Yep.
kind of explain each one of those categories for us, Miss Cindy. That way we know the bottom line on stored CPI and how that works, and people have questions on what that means or how that works, they can ask it at this time, please.
Okay. And I did kind of go over the new tax dollars portion of this. The state certified CPI, of course, we get that information from the Department of Revenue, and this year it's set at 2.4%. So for the general fund, that would increase we could increase taxes by $981,957. And then with our current growth added into that, that would add another $1,194,715. And then we do have 2.3% of stored CPI in the general fund, and that could potentially produce $941,043 in new tax revenue based on the state formula for reaching the max tax. In county fire, the CPI, of course, is still 2.4, so that is $5,315. Current year growth is $3,300 or $432. The library, again, state CPI is $7,332. Current year growth is $4,766. On our road, the 2.4% equals $42,920, and the current year growth would be $25,573.
Okay, any questions on this?
Madam Chair,
Commissioner Roskinek, please.
this is my first time, so could Cindy, let's just go to the first table up there where we have current year growth, 2.92%. How do you get to the what numbers do we use to get to that?
That is a number that's extracted from the Department of Equalization's numbers.
So with that 2.92%, would that be consistent with previous years?
I would have to go back and look.
Okay,
I don't know if that's a
I like to
trend.
look at trends, that's
Yeah,
all.
I don't know if that's a trend or not.
Shannon might be able to answer that for you, Ron.
Good morning, Shannon Rittberger, Director of Equalization. So the state legislature has capped your budget to where you can only increase by 3% of the consumer price index, whichever's less, or by the percentage of growth. Because growth is property that was not on the tax roll last year. So it adds to the tax roll this year, and if you didn't increase your budget for it, the levy would go down to compensate it. It's a wash if you raise your budget by the same amount of money that new property will pay in taxes. And the reason you can do that is because the theory that there's a bunch of new houses in Pennington County that will demand more services from the government, so you should raise your budget for that amount. And that 2.9%, I can't tell you exactly how it compares to last year, but we have for quite a few years been running just under 3%. It might be a couple tenths higher, I'm thinking. Go back about 10 years ago, we were at about 3%, and lately it's been around 2.5 to 3.
So it's capped at 3 though, right?
No, that is the percent of, that's the percentage growth. Last year, our total assessment was 7 billion. This year, it's 7.2 billion. That percentage increase.
Okay.
Due to growth, not counting simple reappraisal for an increasing market. It's property that was not on the tax roll this year. How much of that compared to what we had on the tax roll last year? That's that. We grew 3%.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner DeSanto.
Shannon, just for clarification, if that growth was 4%, we could adjust 4%.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Don't expect that.
I know.
We've been running quite a few years, just under 3%. It seems pretty normal.
Right.
And maybe we ought to be happy with that. There are some places in the country that are growing in the double digits, and then there's a balloon that pops and there's a crash. 3% growth is pretty nice.
Okay, thank you.
Any questions? One more thing, Cindy. On the next page after means of finance, there's some numbers put on that for net county levy change.
The next tab.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So based on the budgets that are in there, and using those max tax dollars, and I use the current year CPI and growth. That's what you would see for a levy change in those funds. So total for the entire county would be $4 per 100,000 in levy change this year, and that's an increase. Now, if you look at the levy history, we have been reducing the levy every year for the last 4 years anyway.
So tell me what that means when you reduce the levy, because what does that do in the next coming years to our budgets or to the numbers?
Well, if you keep reducing your levy, you're going to collect less tax dollars, and you're not going to be able to support your operations and your functions.
And people understand that. If we keep reducing the levy, you get less tax dollars. So in the long run, we're increasing in growth, we're growing in Pennington County, but we're reducing the levy and the number of tax dollars in order to support it. Every
Well,
time we
for
reduce that.
taxpayers, that's a good thing.
It is.
But for the county, it
But-
doesn't seem too good.
When they want more services, it's
Right.
hard to meet that demand if you keep,
Trend's going in the wrong direction, it appears.
you know. I did in that second table, I did calculate, just for your information, that if we were to use the stored CPI in the general fund, we would increase the taxes by $14.40 per 100,000. That's just for your information. That's definitely a board decision.
If you use all of it. Okay, thank
That
you.
is correct.
And we did use how much last year of that stored CPI?
Oh, it's like
5,000?
1% or something like
Yeah.
that. It was a very minimal
It was
percentage
for
that we
county
ended up
fire.
using.
I think it was 1%, I think.
I'd have
Any
to
questions on this
compare them.
page? They do have the 2019 levy on the right of it, if everybody saw that, so they know what it was last year.
Just a point, Madam Chair.
Commissioner?
If you, by reducing the levy each year, that's where you start losing your reserves, because you have to use up those reserves. So it puts you in a quandary as to, if you continue to do that, then you get to a point where you have 1 year where you have to make the big increase. So, in my opinion, you bite the bullet each year to pay for the services that you're going to provide, and you have to adjust your levy to do that.
Which makes sense. Thank you.
I would like to point out, just if we go back to the means of finance, that if we reduce the budget, that is not going to reduce the levy as I have calculated, because we are using cash applied. If we weren't using any cash applied, then we could actually reduce the levy.
Everybody understand that? Okay.
Any more questions?
Any
I
more
know all of the departments are gonna come in and talk about their budgets and revenues. So they will cover the tabs there.
Thank you. Any questions for Miss Cindy at this point, guys?
Not right now.
Okay.
Probably be some later, but none right now.
Come see me. I'll answer anything I can.
Thank you, Miss Cindy. So am I. Hi. Anything else? Miss Cindy, are you first on our?
Yes, I am.
Okay, let's go. The auditor's office.
Okay.
Everybody ready to go through the budgets? No more questions? All right. Auditors first.
Okay. First of all, I did just kind of give you, well, Holly's got it, just a little brief rundown of what I was looking at when I was doing my budget. And I'll wait till she gets that out for you.
Thank you.
Everybody has that piece of paper. So in the auditor's office budget, as far as personnel goes, I did budget for all of the potential FTEs that we have available in the auditor's office for next year. That would include one more accountant, and I have not yet appointed a chief deputy. So that would include that position. In operations, it's a very minimal increase, and that is for the current software that we have. The maintenance on that is going to be going up next year, so that's the increase that you see in that budget. On the election budget, we currently have a position called voter registration supervisor, and that's at a grade 16. That employee is going to be retiring the end of this year, and I do not plan on replacing that position with that title. I'm going to hire somebody as a staff assistant, which is a grade 7. That position is mainly going to be at the front counter doing phone and data entry at that point. Operations, of course, next year we have a presidential election, so we've got a nice increase in the operating expenditures to the election budget. The bond budget that I prepared is based on the debt schedules that we have for each of our bonds. Domestic abuse program, all of the revenues that come in for that are subsequently paid out to working against violence. So that's always just a wash. And then I did look at the numbers on the healthcare trust budget based on history and use that to estimate the revenues and expenditures. I do want to take another look at that after we close out June to see where we're at halfway through this year to see if those need to be adjusted accordingly. And those are the budgets that I had.
Any questions?
Question. Cindy, on the, when this current employee or the current employee retires, what will that save us per year going to a grade 7?
I right off the top of my head, I don't have that specific number. I think currently she's at a 1621, step 21, because she's a long-term employee.
Okay.
So it's about $28 an hour, I believe. And then hiring someone at a grade 7 is 15, I think.
Okay.
Any other questions for Cindy? Well, you got it down pat. Thank you, Miss Cindy. Next is Health and Human Services, Barry Tice.
Good morning, Barry Tice, the Director of Pennington County Health and Human Services. And I just wanted to briefly discuss the past 2 years, and it's kind of been the trend for Health and Human Services as long as I've been in this position, but it's primarily burials are our highest expense beyond wages. Then it trickles down to economic assistance, rent, utilities, medical expenses for hospital visits and pieces where we have uninsured individuals who come in and apply for assistance, as well as medications. And medications have been greatly reduced over the past 8 to 10 years when Medicare Part D came into effect. So rarely do we do medications anymore. Couple of pieces to highlight when it comes to the only other increase in our budget is regarding vehicles. I say we have a fleet. We have 3 vehicles, all of which have been donated by other departments, the fire as well as the sheriff's office. And so when we receive them, they're pretty heavily used. And we have a old Crown Victoria that is nearing its lifeline. And so I've added some money in there to purchase a used vehicle if we can obtain one through one of the other departments. Beyond that, there is not many changes. I don't foresee at this moment any large increases. You know, we had prepared over the past 2 years when we moved into the new building and purchasing larger servers, computer equipment, some other office items, but at this point, we remain pretty static with that.
Any questions for Barry?
Barry, on the salaries, those are just the increases that you're expecting in raises?
Correct.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other questions for Barry? No? Thank you, Barry.
Thank you.
Thank you, Barry.
Equalization, Shannon?
You guys are over an hour ahead of schedule, so we're gonna have to start calling people.
It is.
Alrighty. You're up, Shan.
Okay, so I've submitted a budget. I don't really have anything to say. I will just answer questions if you have questions. My budget is really pretty simple. I don't do multiple things. I only do one thing. And we don't, except for the big picture, we don't bring in income. We don't provide something we charge the public for.
Good question.
Any questions? Lloyd?
How come your workman's comp went up 57%?
Because I got told it was going up and we had under budgeted for a couple of years. It was a combination of the two. It wasn't anything in our office. It just over the years, work comp has gone up. We have the same number of people on workman's comp that we have had.
Okay. It wasn't from additional claims or anything?
No, just the cost of workman's comp went up.
Shannon, same question I asked Barry. The change in salary is simply raises, step increases?
Yes. And the auditor's office told us to plan for this much, and that's what the budget is. There's nothing unusual in there. We anticipate a couple of promotions if we have those, and ordinary raises that we plan for.
Is that included, the anticipated?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
On the travels and conference.
Yep.
What would, can you give us a little bit of a detail what would be involved? And I anticipate some of the employees are going to be going to continuing education and
Yep.
whatnot.
That and to a smaller amount, we have to go to Peer, to the Office of Hearing Examiners, to defend some appeals there. It's that and continuing education. And you'll see an increase this year because last year, a large part of that was held here in the hills, and we didn't have the overnight stays and the travel that we have. So last year I budgeted for less because of that. Now we're back to going to Pier.
Okay.
Any other questions for Shannon? All righty, thank you, Shannon.
Shannon, how many employees do you have?
We have 22 in the office. I want to say something though, because I think I'm going to be faced with it anyways when we see what Cindy presented. I am liberal with my budgeting. I budget for what might happen. I have found that servers are horrible, expensive little devils. So we plan for things that might break. I also plan for healthcare costs above and beyond what my staff is currently taking from the county. I have a young staff, a relatively young staff, and it's not a surprise when one of them has a baby and adds a family plan, or a spouse moves from one job to another and they transfer their health benefits to the county. So I tend to budget to the high side for that. And the auditor's office has pointed that out to me. But I do have some room, and I plan to come back because, you know, I can see the light. I plan to come back with at least a little bit less on the budget. I'm still going to hedge to the high side because something like that might happen, but I do have some room, and that could be $40,000.
And Shannon, you mentioned yesterday that Rich just retired?
Yes.
Shetler?
Yep.
So was he replaced? Or?
Yes, we've hired 2 new appraisers here just recently. We saved some money because Rich was making more than the 2 new appraisers, but that was budgeted for next year because we saw that coming.
So you're going to try to be stabilized at 22 employees then?
Yes, we have FTEs for the office at 22. Right now we have 21 working. I'm not sure how long we'll stay at that, but the county isn't getting any smaller. So
Right.
Shannon, of those 22 employees, how many of them would be using the travel? For
15.
CEs? 15 of them?
Yes.
Okay.
17, includes Gordon and I, so 17.
Okay.
Depending on the year, because not every appraiser goes every year. There's things in life that get in the way, and they can't attend that school that one year.
Okay.
So, but potentially 17.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions for Shannon? No, thank you, Shannon.
All right, thanks.
All right, Miss Deb, Judge Fifely is on his way.
Okay.
He has to be back for a presentation at 10:30, so when he gets here, if we can squeeze him in,
Yes.
we'll do the courts quick. But Eric also had a hearing. He's trying to get here about 15, 20 minutes.
So let's
Eric
do
Witcher.
Mr. Varga.
So whichever, if PJ's here, Mark Vargo's here, whichever one you'd like to start with.
Let's do Mr. Vargo. Thank you, Mr. Vargo, for coming early for us.
No worries, although it does deprive me of the opportunity to say me too after Eric and Judge Fifely talked to you. So, that being said, Mark Vargo, Pennington County State's Attorney. I will not belabor this group because I think you all understand a great deal of what we do. But I do think that your interaction with the State's Attorney's Office tends to be on our civil side. And that's about $300,000 of that 4.8, 4.9 that we've submitted in terms of the budget, plus the FTEs. Of that, we also have what I refer to as a pass-through budget, our mental health costs, the mental health court costs. So that board is run through our budget, but obviously that's not anybody that we employ or that works specifically for us. They work for that mental health board. And so about 4 million of the 4.1 of the 4.9 is what we really are working with in terms of our present budget. And then obviously we're going to be dealing with the question of the additional FTEs that I've submitted to you. What I'd like to point out, though, just briefly, is some of the things that we do that I think sometimes fly below the radar. Because you do interact so much with the civil division, I think, I hope all of you appreciate and respect what it is that Jay and Michelle and to a certain extent Angela have done for you over the last year, the advice to the county agencies. But I'd ask you to remember that that activity is mirrored on the criminal side. We act as the legal research and the advisors to basically every criminal agency in Pennington County. And that includes even the ones that might work more directly with the Attorney General's office, because ultimately the vast bulk of the cases come to us. And so when DCI has a question about a case, they don't necessarily call the AG's office because they know we're going to be the ones prosecuting it. Rapid City PD doesn't call the city attorney's office when they have a question about criminal procedure because they don't do criminal cases. And obviously then we work very closely with the Pennington County Sheriff's Office, Highway Patrol, all of those agencies that bring us the vast bulk of our cases. And so when I say that, what I want you to remember is that when we are working with the budget that we have for criminal cases, we are talking about not just the cases that get prosecuted, but the cases that don't get prosecuted, the cases that are being considered. We're working with cold cases. We're working with cases that we might ultimately decline, and we still might be putting days, even weeks into the consideration of some of those when they're more important cases. So obviously, we work every case over at the criminal courthouse. The AG's office takes a tiny percentage of 1%. We are the ones that are handling the vast bulk of the criminal cases in this county. And if I compare what we've requested in terms of our budget with what, and this is where I was going to hope to do a little me too, Mr. Witcher submitted a budget of 2.8 million to you. I believe the DPLS contract is slated at 345,000, and Judge Fifely's estimate is at 1.3 million. That means that those agencies in combination are submitting to you a $4.5 million budget in terms of defending criminal cases. That leaves out the cases that we still handle that involve every single attorney who gets paid by the public. In other words, private counsel that are being hired. We're dealing with those cases as well. So we are underfunded or underrepresented in terms of the budget over in the courthouse. And I know that Eric is very fond of quoting ABA standards. And I leave to him and to you the question of whether he needs all of those people, and his budget is his business. But what I will tell you is the mere fact that the National District Attorneys Association has not attempted to codify it doesn't change the fact that the idea that the Public Defender's Office is handling roughly 50% of the felonies, roughly 20%, this is the last time I checked, it was a snapshot, but roughly 20% of the misdemeanors. We're handling all of them. And as I said, we're handling a number of cases that get declined. We have probation violations that get considered, and then we decide not to file them because we're going to resolve the case in some other way. We put a lot of time and effort into trying to reduce the numbers for the jail, for the Public Defender's Office, for UJS, for all of those entities. But it does take us time to do that. And one of the difficulties that we faced most recently, and I think some of these people left just slightly over a year ago, but in the last year and change, we have lost 6 people totaling 91 years of experience. So Tracy Decker, Scott Retzel, Trevor Thielen, Heather Sazma, Sarah Morrison, and Josh Hendrickson walked out that door. And it's not just a question of what we pay them, because honestly, our step increases, in some ways, I guess we save a little money. We're bringing in somebody brand new, so when Josh Hendrickson was at step 18 or whatever he was, he'd been here 18 years. His replacement doesn't get that kind of money, right? They're also not anywhere near capable of handling the cases that he was, or even if they can handle those cases, they can't do it as efficiently and as quickly. There's some of that just comes with experience. Our experienced people are honestly a bargain for the county, not a major cost. And so when I asked for the positions that I did in terms of FTEs, that's part of what advised that. But I would like to walk you through, and I was going to prepare a little bit of a chart for this, but you called me earlier, so you don't get a chart. You're going to have to follow along in your heads. But I looked at each of the positions that I'm asking for, and I wanted to be able to tell you how that is offset in the budget in terms of justifying the position and pointing out why it would be economically viable for the county to pursue this line. So the diversion caseworker, I would say, is my priority. If I had to put these 1 through 5, I'm going to tell you in order which ones I think are the most important to our function. Though I believe that all of them are justified and all of them are very important to our continuing to be able to represent the people of the county the same way we represent the defendants of the county. That diversion caseworker costs just under $60,000 a year. That's all the freight. That's all the medical, whatnot. That's the full number. Our juvenile diversion last year brought in $122,000 in the juvenile diversion incentive money that we get from the state. That survived the sunset clause that was originally passed in Senate Bill 73. So we anticipate that we're going to be eligible for something in that range. I think I budgeted at 75 because I try to be very cautious about that. I don't want to have revenue shortfalls. And that was about $25,000 more than we had. We've put $25,000 more into our anticipated revenues than we had in the 2019 budget. So if you offset it against the entirety, and the reason that I look at that as an offset is if we don't do our diversion programs well, we don't continue to do that. You look at what we're doing compared to Minnehaha, we're taking more cases, we're having more of them be successful. I think what government does, it should endeavor to do well. And we have done extremely well in our diversion programs. It reduces even the short-term load on the Public Defender's Office, on the Sheriff's Office, probably increases some of the load on the care campus. I'll be honest about that. But whether you look at it as an offset of the entire budget or just the $25,000, the bottom line is I believe that person is very important. we were running so close to the red in terms of our young adult diversion. Our young adult diversion was probably taking on more cases than he could handle. And so we've already brought somebody in on the diversion side for young adult diversion. And that's because I think the system and everything we've set up with MacArthur to try to reduce long-term costs rests on the idea that we have appropriate places to put these people. The second place that I would say is absolutely essential is an additional civil attorney. And I think what you saw in the mining ordinance might advise you as to what the necessity of that is. And I think PJ, I think, was going to be here. Yep, he's still here. And hopefully stand up and pat me on the back and say he agrees. But as Michelle was going through that ordinance and some of the things that we were trying to accomplish and deciding what we can and cannot do, she started seeing things elsewhere in our ordinances that are simply out of whack. They're not in line with state law necessarily. They're certainly not in line with each other. And it's not the sort of thing that I believe that the two of them, Jay and Michelle, could realistically fix on their own. Right now, we've been bringing in a part-timer to try to assist them with that. We have the budget because we're short attorneys right now, and so I thought it was an appropriate expenditure. So we brought in a part-timer to try to work with some of those issues. But part-timers are one of my least favorite ways of expending county money. The only worst one is overtime. Overtime is by definition the least efficient because you're paying somebody time and a half, and really by the time you're on overtime, you're probably not even at peak efficiency. So we are spending roughly $67,000 this year for a part-timer to try to fill the function that we need on that civil side. The civil attorney, if we budget it entirely, and assuming we use a newcomer, which may or may not be true, but would be $85,000, and that's what I've got it budgeted as. So we're talking a difference of $17,000. And I think that there's no way that anybody can fix the ordinances and make sure that they're in compliance with state statute and the mechanisms. All of you are politically savvy enough to know that the way the legislature approaches these things is when something comes up. And so when they change the ordinances or when they change the statutory authorization on ag property, they weren't necessarily thinking what they'd done in light industrial earlier, or what they'd said about water, or what they'd said about any of the other aspects that we're dealing with in terms of our ordinances. And so they set up different boards and different protocols that we have to follow. And I think we try very hard to follow them. But I think that person needs to be essentially full-time or almost a full-time position devoted to creating that. And I think the offset is not just the $67,000 we wouldn't be spending on the part-timer. It is what you're going to save long-term in terms of litigation, what you can save in compliance. If our ordinances make sense, if our protocols for how you are evaluated on the ordinance, how you appeal the ordinance are set forth, then there's far less time wasted in front of this board and with county agencies in terms of dealing with that. The third and fourth would be a civil and a criminal secretary. The criminal secretary is anticipated to be working with the victim advocates. So it's some money that we would actually be able to get from VOCA. So we would it costs about $55,000 for that secretary. $40,000 of that would be a new FTE. Now what that means is if we don't get, and we've already been told that we have that new FTE and that $40,000 available if we add someone, but they won't just offset what we're already spending. So again, you'd be talking about $15,000 would be the difference between hiring that person and not hiring that person. The civil secretary, again, I think is one that's extremely important, would support the diversion programs as well as the fourth floor generally. This year, we are expending roughly $60,000 for part-timers and overtime for our secretarial pool, and that's both criminal and civil. So between the offset for, and I estimate that so this year we're budgeting $78,000 for overtime. If we reduce that to 62, because you're never going to get entirely away from overtime, there'll be emergency circumstances where somebody needs to be paid. but the amount that we could save would be roughly $60,000. Add that to the $40,000 of the VOCA grant, and that $110,000 for 2 secretaries comes down to basically $10,000. And I will tell the board, this number, as well as the part-timer that I referred to in the civil attorney, these are in our budget as for money for overtime and money for part-time. And we would reduce those if the board grants those FTEs. In other words, there's an actual savings on your budget of approximately $128,000 related to those 3 FTEs. If you didn't give us the FTEs, then I need to leave those lines roughly the same because we got to keep the trains running.
Mark, let me stop you for a second.
You bet.
What do you think as far as percentage of that 76,000, what would it reduce your overtime by if we approve those FTEs?
I was proposing that I would reduce it to about 14,000, so from 76 to 14, so $62,000 for the overtime costs, and the part-time employee costs are roughly $128,000, and I think we budgeted or said that we could budget that to about $20,000.
Okay.
How many
So in
grant-
other words,
Thank
we'd
you.
be saving all in all about $160,000 in part-timers.
So how many granted FTEs do you have?
I'm gonna. How many granted or how many that we're asking for?
That are on grants right now?
Oh, okay, so our domestic violence prosecutor is one. Our, and they don't always come in monetary units. There are some where there's money contributed and it's not a full-time position. So 2 of our victim advocates, our domestic violence victim advocate and our victim advocate director, are paid in large part, if not in full, by those grants.
Yep.
And then we lost a few years ago those DUI prosecutors, or DUI prosecutor. We had one, we added a second briefly, and then all of it went away. They decided they weren't going to pay for lawyers anymore, which I think is a little odd, because if you want DUI prosecution to work, you got to carry it all the way through the courtroom. But
So you have
I did
3
not make the decision. That was a federal question.
You have 3 granted FTEs, Mr. Vargo?
That are grant driven? All right, I'm obviously forgetting a couple because Susan says we have 6 total.
Okay, thank you, sir.
And this would be a 7th then. And then last but by no means least, we come down to the criminal lawyer. That I believe is something that is partially driven by the pay scale that we're working with and the difficulty in retention, which I think is partially pay driven and partially not. But I don't think that we can have the same number of people working when those people have 2 to 5 years experience as we did when most of our people had 7 to 20 years experience. It just kind of, yeah, we save a little money because each of them makes a little bit less, but we're also dealing with people who can't simply crank out a memo in half an hour when Mr. Witcher's folks file something, which he has refused to promise not to do.
So the page with the 5.5 FTEs was a 339.6?
Correct. And then I calculated the offsets, depending on whether you include the entirety of the juvenile diversion incentive, at either 311 or it'd be roughly 250.
And did you break out each one of those 5 salaries?
I did. And I was going to have you a sheet, but I got called early. Sorry.
Maybe you could
But we
send
could
us-
add you that.
Yes, sir.
So just so you know, if you want to write them down now, it's about 60,000 for the diversion caseworker, 85,000 for the civil lawyer, 55,000 for each of the secretaries, 1 civil, 1 criminal, and 85,000 for the criminal lawyer,
1 criminal.
1 criminal lawyer. So 2 lawyers, 2 secretaries, and a diversion caseworker.
And you'll get us a sheet with a breakout on that.
You bet.
Okay.
Thank you.
That does bring up a question. I have had my folks are having some difficulties and I'm heading down to Wichita. I will not be here on Friday. Would you like me to Skype in? Would you like me to send somebody down?
I think we're good.
Okay. I wasn't sure because we were told yesterday that you wanted a representative, so.
Mark,
Susan, are you here Friday? Susan will be here.
Susan will be here, and I'll probably ask Michelle to come down as well.
Nice.
Yes, sir.
over the past, how many years did you lose 6 people?
Just over a year is those 6 people.
So in 2019, you had a requested salary of $3,288,862. 2020, $3,490,000. But you lost 6 people. I mean, there's 6 salaries that are gone.
Well, I still have the FTE. I put them back in, even if we don't have them filled right now.
Okay.
I obviously, in my budget, included our anticipated replacements.
Okay, but
So we saved a little bit of money, but then, of course, we had the COLA and the 2 steps. And so ultimately, our costs on that are higher, but that's based on kind of the county model that you guys gave us. Obviously, that would change if you decide anything different on the COLA or the step increases.
okay, well, that explains that. Kind of jumped out at me for a second.
No,
I'm going,
I
"Wait a
can
minute,
understand that.
6 salaries should make a big difference, but.
It definitely does, and let's put it this way, it's given us a little financial flexibility right now. I'd much rather have the bodies.
So I guess my question is you're replacing those 6 people with the 5 that you just mentioned?
No, sir. I'm replacing those
In
6
addition
people
to-
with new attorneys coming in to do their jobs.
Okay,
We've been flying light the whole year.
okay, well, that shows up
And-
in your overtime, so.
Yeah.
I get it.
And it doesn't show up, where it doesn't show up and where I think it's important, again, to kind of recognize, my attorneys aren't getting any overtime. But if any of them were working less than a 50-hour week right now, I'd be shocked. Because when we're that short, I've got 3 misdemeanor attorneys covering 4 courtrooms. And I've got 5 felony attorneys covering 8 felony judges.
So where it's going to show up is in retention.
I hope so.
In overtime. Any other questions for Mr. Vargo?
Nope.
Thank you all, and I will be available, or, you can certainly reach me, and if you have any additional questions, Susan will be here, and we will endeavor to persevere.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
We do have Judge Fifely here. He's taking a break. And then Mr. Witcher, you're after Judge Fifely. Thank you, sir, for showing up early for us.
Oh, I'm happy to. You caught me just at the right time. I'm between a couple of different meetings. The State Bar Convention is in town, and I have some obligations that I'm required to attend there. Let me first make a plea before I answer any questions and begin. I heard Mr. Vargo talking about increased FTEs. I'm sure Mr. Witcher will have the same. My request is you don't give them any.
Ouch.
I find that my workload and our costs go down if they're not fully staffed. So that's just sort of my perspective. The numbers that we are proposing for you in terms of what your budget will look like for court-appointed attorneys' fees, for jury management and administration, with the exception of an increase that we have asked for in specifically those court-appointed attorneys' fees for folks that are dealing with our abuse and neglect docket, essentially are flat from the previous year. That is not a reflection of how our caseload is driven, but is a reflection of what we're trying to do to better manage the costs that get incurred for the cases that you see. A couple of things that I think are important to note, one of which is the number of court-appointed attorneys' cases that are in our system have increased dramatically over the course of the last 5 years. Total number of private attorney appointments, which is what we're talking about in those court-appointed attorney costs, from 2013 to 2018 have risen from approximately 1,500 a year to approximately 3,500 a year. We had some discussions the other day in the Public Defender's Advisory Council in which Commissioner DeSanto and Commissioner LaCroix were present, but essentially we have a population that is a higher percentage of folks that are needing court-appointed counsel than we had in the past, and that's driven by the number of and types of cases that we're seeing, particularly those that are substance abuse related, and as you well know, that meth population. So what we are seeing regularly is an increase in the number of folks who we are required to appoint counsel for, and that has driven that increase over the course of the past 5 years. But as I indicated, our hope and our expectation is to keep those budget numbers at a relatively flat level for you as we go into 2020. With that, I'll take any questions.
Any questions for Judge Pipely?
No questions.
These guys are pretty easy today.
And I appreciate that. We had a conversation, and I point to Commissioner Hadcock because we started it with some discussions about what the UJS, Unified Judicial System, is trying to accomplish, because this isn't the only county that's seeing an increased budget pressure. Everybody across the state of South Dakota is seeing an increase in particular meth prosecutions, and so every county is having that pressure on their court-appointed attorney budget. After our discussion a couple of years ago, I talked to the Chief Justice about trying to sort of remove that pressure in some circumstance and getting court-appointed counsel of folks that we believe truly need court-appointed counsel. And one of the things that happened was that Pennington County and Brookings County piloted a new court-appointed attorney application form that seemed to be successful. Our goal sort of over time is essentially to have a more critical look at those folks that perhaps on the lower end of the scale in terms of what the charge is, and have some capability to manage money from other credit sources rather than making the county be their bank, because you end up being the creditor on those folks that get court-appointed counsel. That pilot was sort of the tail end of last year. We're beginning that process this year. One of the reasons we're hoping to be flat is that application. We believe that expectation over time is that we'll have about 10% of the folks that might otherwise have been appointed counsel in the past, sort of what I'll call the eyeball test, will now have a more critical analysis in terms of that. But I'll have sort of a better perspective for you when we have this discussion next year. But just know that it hasn't been ignored. It's in the process. That was driven in large part with sort of our discussions a couple of years ago. The Chief Justice recognized that that was a need across the state. Unfortunately, because I opened my mouth, I got to chair that committee. But it looks like that's going to be successful not only for this county, but for others across the state in terms of a more critical analysis, or at least a tool in the judge's toolbox to allow a more critical analysis for court-appointed attorneys. Because there are a large number of folks that have sort of lower level crimes that can come up with that money in a fashion that if we look more critically at what their assets are, what sort of credit they have, what sort of family money they may have available, that we can take a look at that. But I just wanted to make sure you know that that's in the process. That's one of the reasons that we're trying to keep our numbers flat, relatively flat for you over the course of the coming year. But that's in the works, and we'll have hopefully further information that'll be a little more data driven for you over the course of the next year or two, as opposed to just my anecdotal.
Well, Mr. Fifley.
Yeah.
Anytime that you need us to come, like watch some of the things that you do for our county, you're more than welcome to send Ms. Holly an email, because a lot of us like to kind of see what's happening and where the money's spent, and also just see what we do in the county a little bit more. So anytime you have an invite for any of us, please send that to us. Gary does have a question.
Yes.
Commissioner Drew, sorry, he does.
One question, Judge.
Yes, Commissioner.
Under the breakdown, you've got listed witnesses, competency evaluations, jury, and then medical. What does that medical include?
There are certain folks that we are required to have evaluations, and that.
Oh, so this is for medical evaluation.
Correct.
Okay. I
Yep.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Judge.
Thank you.
Sir.
If you need anything else, let me know.
Have
Appreciate
a
it.
good day, sir. Thank you for coming in early. All right, Eric Witcher. Good morning, sir.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for
Eric
coming
Witcher,
early.
Public Defender. I think I just want to start by saying, as I look back at 2018, we've seen a sort of a continued trend, and that is just an increase of the criminal appointments that are coming to our office. For those of you that may not have a prior understanding of what we do, we wait, and if the court appoints us as counsel in a criminal case or a juvenile case or abuse and neglect case, then it's our duty to represent that individual. And it sort of goes without saying, there's a limit on how many clients any given attorney and an office can represent. And so the American Bar Association has set out guideposts and standards that how many cases any one individual attorney should help in the criminal realm on the defense side. And so those are our guideposts and how we try to staff our office. Through those standards, from the cases that we received in 2018, to be fully staffed would have required 24 full-time attorneys. We had 18 plus myself, and just to give you an idea, I do the administration, but also take about a third of a caseload. So, so we could even consider that a half of an FTE for those purposes. So we're still down. Part of the way that we handle that is, one, we ask our attorneys to take more than they maybe should. Secondly, we also get out of cases that then go to the other line item on your budget, which is a court-appointed attorney's budget. You get efficiencies with the public defender's office because just the efficiencies of scale. So, for example, one misdemeanor attorney will handle 500 misdemeanor cases on the defense side in a year. And so through that efficiency, we have a cost per case of about $400 every time we're assigned, which is just take the total number of the cases assigned to us in a year and divide it by the budget, and that's what you get. Typically, when we are not appointed, if it goes to private counsel, that becomes about $1,000 per case. So there is an economic factor in all of this to keep a well-funded and staffed public defender's office so we can take as many cases as we can. We've been in some discussions in the Public Defender Advisory Board. We're running in limitations on our office size now, so we're trying to find some other creative solutions for the county going forward. For today's purposes, I look at from last year, we had an 11% increase in felony charges, another number, and most of this is driven by methamphetamine arrests and appointments. So that's that big number. And they create a challenge for my office, create a challenge for really everybody's budget in the criminal justice system, including Mr. Vargo's and Judge Feifley's, because just a felony case is a serious matter. It involves the potential of 5 years in state penitentiary. So there are responsibilities to meet the due diligence standards that we have to do as a lawyer to be competent are just increased. And also the procedures that need to take place with the court system are increased. So that is just a real driver for, unfortunately, for our county. One of the two priorities I have for my request this year is to add one additional attorney as well as a caseworker. And I want to start by talking about a caseworker. With the nature of our practice anymore, so much of what we see is driven by alcohol, drugs, or mental illness. And so those folks, oftentimes they have their legal issues where we have to watch the video, file the motions, go to court, try the case potentially. But they also have this other basket of issues that they're trying to deal with, so they hopefully don't get another charge while the case is pending. They show up for court, those sort of things, and they go from the gamut on getting them connected with a chemical dependency evaluation, for example. Who's providing them, at what cost, that referral process. The following up on that, making sure that there are releases signed so we can get that CD evaluation. Who's doing treatment now, connecting them with a treatment center for substance abuse issues. doing warm handoffs for if their issue is they don't have transportation or housing, getting them connected with resources within the community for those matters. Communications is oftentimes a very difficult thing. So how do we, taking an extra step of how do we get into communication with these folks? So as attorneys, we are expected to do all of that outside of the courtroom advocacy and work with our clients. And as our caseloads are here, that's the first thing that goes. And so it ends up in delayed hearings. It ends up in uh, failures to appear. It ends up in just the clogging of that system by us unable to make those connections. So caseworkers are now considered really across the country as just a vital function of a public defender's office of a certain size, and we are of that size. It's just, if we had a caseworker, they would be busy every second of every day in our office on day one. There's just that much of that outside the courtroom advocacy and warm handoffs and coordination. And another attorney just to handle the caseload. So that's, we've had the same issue that Mr. Vargo has had, and the difficulties of recruitment and retention for attorneys. It is hard. I'm not in his boat right now, but that could, it could happen to me. We lost an attorney back in February of 2018. That FTE has still not been filled. We've lost 3 other attorneys in the meantime, so we filled, but that was the last time we were fully staffed. If we hope to be fully staffed again in August, and that's just the number of applicants to get them here. And that when you get here, you just got to, run. And some people can handle that and some people can't. So those are the 2 priorities I have this year. Outside of that, most of the other line items are relatively in line, and so I will stand for questioning.
Any questions?
With regards to these salaries, and as with Mark, the employees aren't in place right now, but they're budgeted. So
That's correct.
the increase of 75,823, that would reflect the one new attorney and one caseworker?
No.
Yes.
Yes.
Sorry, the increase of what then?
Oh, I was just looking at the change in salaries, and you were saying you wanted to, that 70, if I'm reading it right, 75,823, would that?
With the 2 FTEs?
No.
That with the 2?
75,
Needing 141, well, for just the salaries, you need 112,515. I had this question too, and you're showing only a change of 75,823 on the first page.
I see that.
And you're also only down at the bottom showing an increase of only 1 FTE, so you must have left something out on that.
And I know on this report beguiles me too. I saw in the budget summary that there's 2 FTEs being requested. And because, and on the budget breakdown, I count them and they're all there. So, as far as that change is concerned at 75,000, I wonder if it's doing that half-funded FTE of the prior year, because you granted me that half-funded FTE of, and it might be counting that one plus the caseworker or something like that. So, because we're hiring someone in August in the anticipation that they're only going to work for half a year, and we want to continue that process again.
So the question is, basically, Eric, the 14118, is that just your regular budget without the 2 FTEs of the increase? That's without the 2 extra FTEs you're asking? And then you're gonna add in the 2 FTE total?
No, that 141,000 increase should be the total increase. When we ran through what each of these FTEs would cost,
Yes.
that request is that 2.119, which is $75,000 change over what we had budgeted for 2019. And that's just the number. And I understand the confusion,
No,
but
I think I got it.
Okay.
Madam Chair,
Yes, sir.
I think he's right. I think what he did was he added in half a year's salary because the difference is $36,692, which is about half a year's salary. So you're not hiring until June, so you only added in half a year's salary.
for one of those FTEs, yeah, that happens in June, right?
So the only inaccurate number would be the 2020 request for 33 should be 34.
That should say 34, I think, yeah.
All right.
And the grand total with the FTEs is 141, 118?
Correct.
Okay,
Makes sense now.
okay. Everybody got, Ron, did you get that? Mm-hmm. Okay, sir. Any other questions for Mr. Witcher?
I was just curious under equipment, it's minor, but it looks like the request for 2020 is up roughly, I just wondered what that
Yeah.
entailed.
It's a computer glitch. We thought we had asked if we needed more computers, and we thought we were okay, so we didn't buy them last year, and we turned out we weren't. We needed to buy more than we expected this year. So that's a delay catch-up from last year, which is unfortunate because we had about 200,000 in room last year's budget. We could have bought all the computers. So that's what that's about. Equipment is new computers.
I'd say one thing, Eric, is earlier this year I'd done a Reform and Justice workshop and I had spent some time with Laura, which I never spend no time up with the state's attorney's office, but she echoed hardly exactly what you just said about a person coming in and the time span between the court dates that all of a sudden there's multiple charges and it ends up being multiple charges because they can't do it quickly enough. And then it's clogging up the system because you can't even get one done before something else happens. And so, when he talks about a caseworker, that's probably the prime preventative way to try to get things going a little faster and be able to pay attention to the client and stuff. I mean, she expressed it just as much as you did, her frustration along with getting the evaluations done to help things go a little faster. So I just wanted to share that with the rest of the commission that you're not the only one has those concerns.
Eric, one other question. If you're adding those 2 employees, isn't your group insurance cost going to go up?
Yeah, that's a good question. It should, so I don't know and I'll ask Shannon that and maybe
Ask
send out an
Holly.
email.
Holly?
The departments were directed to put FTEs in a completely separate budget. So the $118,000 increase that Eric's showing is not included for those 2 new FTEs. That is just his strict, already approved FTEs that he has right now. So that explains your group insurance, that it didn't go up on the other side. But if you look at the separate budget that has just the 2 FTEs, he is increasing at $13,000 in group insurance.
Okay.
For just those 2 FTEs.
All right.
Well, that explains some of the numbers too.
They-
Okay.
Yeah,
Thanks, Holly.
Very
they're
good.
not meant to be together.
Okay.
Thanks, Holly, because I
Thank
just
you.
asked that back there.
That's why I wasn't, that's why I
Because
wasn't understanding the
Mark's
114.
weren't like this. Mark was at our requests,
Yeah.
and he didn't have a separate piece of paper showing this, so that'll come to us as a request.
So we're adding 14565 plus the 141,118.
That's correct. Sorry about that. Yes.
Well, that's what I was like, this, for some reason, it isn't adding up. Maybe I'm missing something, but I was gonna ask about it with Cindy later, but thank you for clarifying that, Miss Holly. You can correct us, Holly, if we're going in the wrong direction. Thank you, Miss Holly, for your help. Any other questions for Mr. Witcher?
No.
And Ron, you got that, it's his increase this year is 100,041 118, plus the two FTs, 141,565 on the next page.
Okay.
Okay, so, okay.
So to clarify, the 75,823 increase in salaries on the first page is simply,
The 1%.
It should be
Raises.
just the wage policy.
okay,
Okay.
I see a trend.
Okay. Any other questions, board?
Thanks, Eric.
Not?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So his increase looks
Trying
like
to keep you on your
282,
toes, Eric.
674. 200,000, 282,674 is his increase.
Right.
Okay. PJ?
Good morning, Commissioners. BJ Conover, Director, Planning Department. Normally, I'm not in with this group, but the sheriff needed to change some things around, so happily obliged. So thank you for taking me this morning.
Thank you.
Something a little bit different with this budget. We are asking for 1.5 FTEs. We are asking for $10,000 to go in long-term reserves for a vehicle because we lost one in an accident last year. And the things we're asking for come from public requests. They are asking for building inspectors. They're asking for more ordinance inspectors. They're also asking for more streamlining in our department, less paperwork, be able to do more things online, access more information online. And in saying all that, so what you'll see in our budget is a request for a building inspector / ordinance officer coming in. And that is basically at an expense of, let me find that, I apologize here. Of, if you take an insurance, just a little over $76,000. We're also asking for a half of a FTE, and that would be the part-time, about 20 hours a week, for somebody to come in and simply scan documents in our office. To be able to get more online friendly and to be able to have more documents available to the public at a click of a button, we have to turn that paper into digital form. We've estimated, using online estimates, that we have over 500,000 documents in our office that need to be scanned. And we estimated how long it takes somebody to scan those documents, and we estimated about 2.5 years. So we would be looking for this half FTE for about 3 years, and we'd keep coming back. We don't want to send those documents out. Number one, then, because we don't have control of them, there's a possibility they could get lost. They are also all original documents. And then also, if the person has questions, we can answer those questions in-house, and there's just more control over all of that. And in addition to that is a $10,000 request for the long-term reserve for the vehicle that we lost. In addition to that, you'll see some dramatic increases in professional services and fees. And one gone up about 86%, and then also rentals gone up 100%. What those indicate are the every 2 years training for the on-site wastewater treatment system, and that's a break-even program. What we expend, we get back and then some. The reason it's higher than usual this year is because we're also wanting to offer an erosion and sediment control training next year. And we've all seen the dramatic effect on that and how it can have on people. And so we were thinking of doing that. Again, those are break-even programs. And I say all that to end with this. These aren't necessarily absolutely have-to-haves. And I may be digging a hole for myself here, but it's brutally honest. Our office has always worked as streamlined as we can and always spent under budget. These are things that the public has requested, and we're trying to respond to those things at this time. A building inspector and ordinance officer would be beneficial, but it wouldn't impact every single person in the county. And I've said this to Commissioner Drews and some of the state's attorneys before, we would be willing to sacrifice a building inspector temporarily to be able to help support the state's attorney's office in getting the civil attorney that will help our office with our ordinances, because that will have a county-wide impact. So other than that, I'll have it here for any questions.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner DeSanto.
Explain rentals again. What
I'm sorry?
rentals?
So the rentals are how much it costs for us to reserve a spot over. Right now, we're going to not School of Mines, the Journey Museum, because we're able to have enough capacity to be able to break even for the cost, and then also for food.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
So PJ, for the part-time, it seems to make more sense to have volunteers. We always have a lot of volunteers in the jail and other areas, or even some of the trustees, maybe, maybe not trustees, Holly's eyes go big. But, you see what I'm saying? For that 20 hours a week, we have a lot of people and that want to get involved, and we saw that yesterday with helping, in the county and volunteering. So I think if you put something out there, you'd be surprised, who wants to help instead of hire someone for that.
Yep, and we have discussed that in the office. One of the things that, the wall we keep hitting on that is every time you get a new volunteer, you have to train them how to do it. And then that's additional time. And there's no consistency in whether they're gonna keep coming back over and over again. And these are very critical, wanna touch the document once, don't wanna have to go back and do it, because that document has to be scanned and then put into a specific spot. So,
And maybe even train a couple people so that
Yeah,
person can train the next
absolutely.
instead of just train one, makes a little bit more
Yep,
sense.
something to look into, absolutely.
And then for building inspector, I'm not opposed to that, except we need to get some codes and different things, and how fast is that going to happen before you put forth and get a building inspector? I guess that's,
So the
tell
plan
me
is to
about
get
that.
that, I'm sorry to interrupt, go ahead.
No, go
Is to
ahead,
get
sir.
that building inspector in, because this person would have to have experience. They couldn't come in and just learn it and then go to the classes. They'd have to come in, evaluate the needs of the county, what has been said in the past and presented in meetings, and then propose a program in some way. And we know it's not going to be up and running within the first 6 months to 8 months, which is why this position is also / ordinance officer, because a building inspector should need to know both of those while they're out there, because they'll learn about what the problems are while they're helping with the ordinance enforcement.
But you have to change the rules in order to, meaning codes and ordinances, don't you, before that? And how long does that take before that moves forward?
So if the comp plan is approved this year, and then we'll have to see how we go with the zoning ordinance, that's all gonna flow into next year, and having a building inspector involved in that process would be vital.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yep.
So it's something not just the public needs, it's what PJ needs in his
It would be a
office.
good timing. I mean, it could happen after the zoning ordinance is done, but, yep,
Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
yep. We're
Madam Chair.
responding. Yep.
Commissioner Roskinek.
What segment of the public are requesting the building inspector, PJ?
Most of the people are people with single-family residences where the construction is under par. We have houses that are not being built on foundations from certain contractors. Contractors are not being held accountable. We have driveways on slopes that are pulling away from the home because they're not being installed properly. A lot of contractors that come in are asking for us to have building inspectors because the playing field out there is not even. They're getting underbid and undercut by contractors that are not built, that can, because they're not building to a certain level.
Do they
And
have
we've
to have-
had, sorry,
Do they have to have licenses?
not with us, they do not.
Not in the county, so maybe that's some step with the building inspector that we have to have licensed contractors.
And that is anticipated, and then also incorporating international residential codes, not just international business codes. And we have those right now by state law because we have a comprehensive plan. Contractors are supposed to follow international IBC,
Building
National
codes,
Business Codes,
yeah.
but it excludes by state law single-family residences and duplexes and stuff, which is exactly what we want it to do. So we're looking to adopt the International Residential Code, which has those requirements.
A follow-up, Mr. Roskinek? Sorry to interrupt.
That answers my question then. With regards to the scanning, can that be done within your office then?
It would take staff time. We're trying to be more as efficient as we can.
So then if you were for the scanning, where would that take place at? To do your
Probably
scanning?
one of the cubicles in the office that we already have.
Is there any other departments that would need that service too? So if you were to do it, could you do that with another department that might need that name service if we found volunteers?
It is possible. I know the only other department I know for sure that has somebody dedicated to scanning is Register of Deeds.
So then if you got 500,000 documents, are they in your office now?
Yes, that's just our office.
And then they're scanned and they're electronically available but they still remain in your office.
We're looking into how long we have to retain some of the documents. With building permits right now, like the city, they've gone almost paperless. Somebody comes in with an application, they scan it merely to have the signature. Then all the documents that come in with that application just exist in the system. We have we have building permits and documents that go back to the sixties.
You haven't been in that back room yet, huh?
Probably wait.
John was
Sounds scary.
shaking his head about the scanning and other volunteers when you were saying that, Commissioner Ross Connect, that there's other departments that do need that, so, maybe we could look into that, or,
That'd be good. No, I didn't know that.
Potentially the register of deeds also. I've visited with Donna about that in the past. She has a need for that too.
so, looks like we could be looking, put out for volunteers.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Ross
PJ,
Connect.
would that, if we start having building inspections and building codes, I understand leveling the playing field. Is that also going to apply? Are we going to be sending people out when somebody comes in to get a building permit for a shed out on a farm somewhere that they want to build themselves? Or are we going to?
Have an inspector go check for a shed? No, I don't anticipate that, nor do I think we need that. The main thing is, a lot of it is still falls on the landowners to do it responsibly. And with a shed, it would be not to build into the setbacks or easements, things that we would tell them during the time they come in for the building permit.
Okay. Good deal.
Any other questions for PJ?
I'm good.
Okay,
All right, thank you for your
thank
time.
you, PJ.
Yep.
Does anybody
you,
have,
PJ.
Cindy's still here, does anybody have any questions at this point for Cindy? They might have came to pass in their head while they were going through this first set?
Did you find some more money?
Find some more money, Gary said?
Well, you better get that scanner going.
You just write checks, don't you? That's what I was told.
Cindy, it sounds like Ron and Lloyd are gonna meet with you. Me and Gary already have.
And
Mr.
I will
DeSanto.
also.
Yeah, Mr. DeSanto would like to set up a time with you when you have time too, Miss Cindy. Holly, you have anything to share? We do have lunch today if you guys want lunch. Thanks to Holly and Gary and Joan. So lunch is always at 11:15 in my family.
Done?
We're
Yes.
done for the morning.
Do we have to motion to adjourn?
Recess.
Recess, motion to recess.
So move.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed? I forgot to ask one question.